was 21 years old. I had recently become a police officer and was also recently dumped, so my friends suggested I download Tinder. As a 21-year-old and new cop, I had the "I'm invincible and I can take on anyone" mentality. I matched with a very good-looking girl, way out of my league. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she knew a great open field for us to look at the stars and hang out, and that we could meet at her house. So, the night came. I was excited, and she seemed to be excited too when I picked her up. She guided me to the field, and it looked perfect. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. But I did spot something odd further out in the field. In the distance, I could see really dim headlights. A few moments later, a van started driving towards us and pulled up right in front of us, almost close enough to block my car from going forward. I told her to stay in the car and I would go and say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the glove compartment and walked up towards the front driver's side of the van. There was a large man in the driver's seat. I asked him what was going on and if he could back his van up a little bit so I could continue driving. He was very polite, said he was the owner of the property, and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he had been having trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we only came out to watch the stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that, told me to have a nice date, and drove away. After that exchange, the girl I was with started texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped back into my car, and I maneuvered into a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. My date then hopped out of the car and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was screwed. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me down to the ground. Luckily, I was able to wrestle him onto his back and get up. I then saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and truck, and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my "I'm invincible" mentality, I said no. She started to cry and said they didn't want to hurt me. He then started heading back towards the van. At that point, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and demanded they lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911, tell them my name and badge number, that I had two at gunpoint, and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field, but whilst on the phone, they both got up and fled. Again, stupid new cop young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after the man, who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops, as well as seeing a muzzle flash. My "I'm invincible" mentality went right out of the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I first picked her up, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up were my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were "dumbass" and "stupid fucking rookie." I hopped in their car and we headed towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they start getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the back of the van. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. I headed to the back of the van, where I saw several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front passenger seat, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't blood. The plates had been stolen, and the van was also reported stolen. I still get shit at work about the whole encounter, but luckily, no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again. Before I continue with the final story, if you've enjoyed this video so far, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to see future content from me, as well as help me in the algorithm. Thank you. This happened 3 summers ago, but I remember the main events. To preface this, I have been on a shocking amount of dates and put myself in many foolish situations in the past. I am a female, and I was 25 at the time. It started on the Plenty of Fish app. I came across a cute guy who was my type physically, kind of nerdy looking. On his profile, he had very adventurous photos of him hiking and travelling. His life seemed really exciting, and it made me want to get to know him. Once he saw that I had looked at his profile, he sent me a message. We flirted a bit, back and forth, and exchanged numbers, even though he lived about an hour away. He's never been to my city. I didn't plan on coming here, so we probably wouldn't meet. I respected his honesty. I don't like people wasting my time. One day shortly after our first exchange, he sent me a text randomly stating he was in my town on some work thing and invited me to a bar he was at. I decided to meet up since I was already in the area. He said he would pick me up. I agreed, even though it was only 4 blocks away. It took him way longer than it should have to get to me, and I honestly don't think he was ever actually at that bar. Once in my date's car, I noticed it was a rental, and that it seemed like he had just gotten his license because he was an awful driver. After driving in circles, he told me to pick a place, but not in this area because parking was impossible. I picked a place 15 minutes away by car with lots of parking, but also a busy place since I was with a stranger. Once we arrived, he started pressuring me to drink. He insisted. I'm not a huge drinker, but I enjoy pub-style bars. I caved and had a drink. Then he again pressured me to have another one. He was very pushy and seemed really irritated that I was protesting his demands. Usually, I would end a date pretty quickly when being mistreated, but he became charming enough to keep me there, at least until we were done with our date. I saw an old acquaintance at the bar and wanted my date to know I knew him. In my head, I think I wanted my date to know that someone could identify him. I'm not a paranoid person, but I think my subconscious was on alert. After an hour of us talking at the bar, I told him I'm ready to head out. He insisted we go across the road to get coffee. At the time, it seemed strange to me. Neither of us had much to drink and didn't need to sober up, so coffee seemed like an odd choice to me. Regardless, I entertained the idea. Once there, we sipped our drinks. He told me he rented a beautiful Airbnb in a nearby neighborhood that is more out of the city towards the country. He was going on about how nice it was. He told me he had it all to himself and invited me to come back with him. I kept politely declining and threw around different excuses, which he would counter with a reason for me to come. With no intention of going, I agreed, but only if he would drive me home to get things for an overnight stay. I felt like he wasn't going to let me say no. He seemed happy with that answer, so we headed out. Whilst driving in the direction of my place, he said that instead we would stop at a 7-Eleven and grab some travel-sized toiletries for me, so I wouldn't need anything. I started to panic because my plan was starting to crumble. Something about him was off, and I felt stupid for even getting back in his car to begin with. He turned his car and we started to head towards his place, towards the country. There weren't any 7-Elevens or open stores in this direction, in the middle of nowhere. So I mentioned to him that I'd prefer not to stay at his place tonight and asked him to take me home. What he said next made me extremely nervous to be around him for much longer. He said he was sharing the Airbnb with the owners. They are really fun and sweet, and they drink and play games together, despite previously telling me he had the place to himself. I didn't want to make it obvious that I was catching on to his lie, so I went along with it and explained that I had to wear my cute fluffy overnight pajamas instead of my date dress because I would be way more comfortable. Then I listed a few other things I needed. I mentioned that I need my medication and absolutely cannot miss a dose. Surprisingly, he turned around, and as we drove back into the city, I felt a bit more calm, but not yet safe. Finally, we got close to my place. I had no intention of letting him know where I live. He mentioned that he was going to come up to my apartment once we got there, but there was no way I was going to let that happen. I didn't know what I would do, but I looked for any opportunity to get out of the situation, knowing he could turn around and take me somewhere private in just 15 minutes if he wanted to. We pulled up to a stop sign where people were crossing, thank God. I quickly but calmly got out and said, "You know, I think I have a headache. I'll text you." I closed the car door and walked through a public park, which was beside a building that his car wouldn't be able to drive into. I looked back to make sure he wasn't getting out of his car or following me, and I could see him staring at me. He was so furious, it gave me chills. Within the hour, he had blocked me on Plenty of Fish. Looking back, I keep theorizing what he was trying to do to me, wanting to get me a coffee so he could possibly put something in it. I think he told me on Plenty of Fish that we wouldn't ever meet to maybe cover his tracks. And I know he did not have good intentions with me. Since then, I have met my fiancée on Plenty of Fish, and was extremely careful about dating up until then, making sure the first few dates were very public, and to arrange my own transportation. That's all the stories I have for today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers, as we are so close. And also consider watching some of my previous content. Thank you.